Picture the scene. We're in medieval Japan, maybe the 11th century. We're in a bedchamber, and against one wall there's a man, an old man, and he's clearly unwell, very unwell. He's dying. And on the wall opposite him is a devotional picture of Amida, Buddha of the Pure Land. And attached to that picture of Amida is a red thread. And the other end of that red thread is held firmly, or as firmly as he can, by the dying man in bed. His eyes are fixed on that picture, and he's sounds like mumbling to himself, but he's actually reciting over and over and over again the Nembot. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. Why is he doing this? Because he hopes by establishing this intimate connection, which hopefully Amida will not be able to ignore, he will achieve, thanks to the grace of Amida, rebirth in the Pure Land, from which it is but a short journey to full Buddhahood. And this, according to the ancient sutras, is the aim of our practice, to attain a better land from where it is but a short journey to Buddhahood. But it's very clear that we go to the Pure Land post-mortem, after death in this life. And the red string is far from essential. It's merely a way of focusing, hopefully, the attention of Amida, and certainly the attention of the faithful Buddhist lying on his deathbed. Okay, so that's a lovely picture of these wacky, far-out ancient Orientals of long ago. What's this to do with us? Surely we want clean, modern practice. How on earth can we think about that mindset? And in one sense, that's perfectly true. Obviously, different times, different places, different beliefs, different experience, different everything. And yet, maybe we find ourselves asking exactly the same sort of questions for exactly the same sort of reasons. This is, after all, the great matter of life and death. What could be more immediate for this dying man than what's my life been? What's it worth? Where am I going? What happens now? The great matter of life and death. And we're all here, in one sense or another, because of the great matter of life and death. And I'd suggest that one of our key questions is, well, given that, what do we think happens here? Is this it? Is this all there is? Are we headed somewhere else, whether that's the Pure Land, Christian heaven, some other engagement, higher states of consciousness, whatever we think? Are we trying to slough off appearance in the name of another reality, behind, beyond, above, however we want to say it, the elsewhere. Or is this world perhaps some kind of test, whether we see that as intellectual, spiritual, or moral? This is a test we have to pass, and based on our results, of course, one of the classic examples of this appearance and reality dualism, which actually a lot of Buddhists really love, is the series The Matrix films. There's a clear distinction between the world of appearance and the reality. And we know that that dualism has been adopted and taken up and used in all kinds of ways. And the basis of ordinary mind practice is quite the opposite. No. This is appearance and, oh, look, it's also reality. But whichever way we're going to go on this, how are we going to judge? You know, in the Matrix, you're given a choice, blue pill or red pill. Yeah, but we're not. How are we going to judge? What experience are we going to judge on? Or whose word are we going to take? These are important questions, the vital questions. In Soto, you know, we show respect, great respect to Master Dogen, the founder of our tradition. And if we were going to ask him, he might say something a bit like this. Therefore, the very impermanence of grass and tree, thicket and forest is the Buddha nature. The very impermanency of men and things, body and mind, is the Buddha nature. Nature and lands, mountains and rivers are impermanent because they are the Buddha nature. Supreme and complete enlightenment, because it is impermanent, is the Buddha nature. We're all already through and through Buddha nature. And in that sense, we're already perfect. Everything is perfect. And yet, but let's say we take Dogen's word for this. It is exactly as he says, but okay, but what do we do? How are we supposed to live our lives knowing this? But actually, as another question becomes even sooner than that, why? Why would we take Dogen's word for it? Well, in Dogen's opinion, he is the true heir of the original teaching of Buddhism. He's, like every other Buddhist, says, we don't need different Buddhist sects. That's just nonsense. All we need to do is to stick to the original and true teaching. And this is it. I'm going to tell you what it is. Okay. Or do we believe that Dogen's own realization, his own enlightenment, was so deep, so profound, that whether or not this was the original teaching of Shakyamuni Buddha, which, well, you know, that his enlightenment was so deep and so profound that that's okay. He knows. He has seen. He says it all. No more question. Or do we say he's the heir to this wonderful ongoing Zen tradition? Clearly, he'd studied, he knew stuff, added his own insight. Yes, he's the continuity between Indian Mahayana, Chinese Chan, Japanese Zen. All of these are really useful answers because we don't need to think about them. You either take them or you don't. What we don't really want is the mess. What we don't really want is that Dogen is part of a history of Zen, of Chan, of the infinite variations of Buddhism. And not just as separate sects, but this continual dealing with these same questions, which different schools, different teachers keep returning to. But Dogen is neither the direct heir of Shakyamuni, nor, for our purposes, the possessor of an immaculate and perfect enlightenment. He was a teacher, a monk, in history, dealing with what seemed to the Japanese and the Chinese of his day the most pressing questions around the nature of Buddhism. And they're the great matter of life and death. They're the same questions which we kind of have to wrestle with. But there was no more agreement, no unanimity on any of this. Though there are interesting developments, there are interesting progressions, there are interesting similarities. If it's simply a matter of holding the red string, if it's simply a matter of saying, well, tell me what to do and I'll do it, no worries, just do this, thank you, then it's simple. But if we want to know why or how this came to be, I think to an extent we really do, because it will stop us getting confused in a lot of very obvious ways. Then it's worth asking the questions. It's a lovely idea, isn't it? We're all already Buddhas. Hey, who wouldn't like that as an idea? No worries. Okay, but what do we do then? What are we supposed to do about it? And then when you hear another very respected Buddhist teacher say, this is the most ridiculous idea I have ever heard. Of course we're not all Buddhas. If we practice for 7,000 million trillion lifetimes, we may perhaps achieve enlightenment. All else is bunk. Okay. Why, how is quite useful. So, if we go back to the early years of around the beginning of the Common Era, so that's a couple of centuries before the Common Era, the first couple of centuries of the Common Era, and we're talking about near infinite fragmentation of Buddhist schools and traditions all arguing amongst themselves. And out of that is slowly beginning to coalesce what will become the Theravada, that sees itself as the tradition of the ancients, the tradition of the elders who have the right answer and the true teachings embodied in the Holy Scriptures, and is a very rigorous, specifically monastic-centred tradition. And then on the other hand, you have what will become the Mahayana, the second turning of the wheel, which isn't so much an actual movement as multiple explorations of, well, okay, if we don't do that, what can we do? And some of them move in a lay direction, and some of them want more mystery, and some of them want to kind of rapprochement with what is becoming Hinduism. It's complicated. It's a mess. But it's also very exciting, very interesting. There's a lot going on. And one of the ideas which comes up, begins to play quite an important role at that time, is the idea of the Tatatagarba. So that's the tatata, the thus come one or the thus gone one, and the garpa, which is, well, this is where it gets interesting. Often gets translated as matrix or womb or embryo or seed or husk, and it kind of embodies this range of things. And as soon as we go, oh, womb and embryo, that sounds nice, that sounds nourishing. Maybe we've got a kind of proto-feminist way of thinking about it here. And in actual fact, it's not. Sadly, I think it'd be lovely if it was. What it is actually a rigorous dualism. And maybe matrix sums this up best. It's, a matrix. Although again, the root of the word matrix is ma, this syllable which comes to us as mother. But we won't go there. A matrix is like something which you cast from. So there's a thing, and then you have the thing you actually want, which is quite distinct from the matrix. And if you read the Tatagarbha sutras, it becomes clear that there's a very concrete distinction between the husk and the seed, the valuable embryo and the valueless womb. It's about something being hidden. It's about the truth being hidden by a misleading appearance. And the aim, therefore, is to work out how to slough off the husk, how to lose the appearance for the truth hidden inside. And it also becomes clear that this is intended as a true truth. This Buddha seed is real, and it's really inside. And so we reject appearance because what we want is this little inside. And we can polish it to try and get it cleaner, or we can feed it, we can nourish it in various ways. But clearly this is what we want, and we want to get rid of the appearance stuff. Now, obviously, for the last few weeks, we've been talking about emptiness and non-dualism, not appearance and reality, but everything as being empty and yet real. And obviously, these ideas are being developed at roughly the same time, so there's a potential complete contradiction in them. But as so often happens with Buddhism, what happens is that they slightly hybridize. So we go, well, if you don't see the Buddha nature as something true and real and separate, we can actually see, well, come on guys, what is it that makes change possible in the world? What is it that makes Buddhahood possible? Well, it's emptiness, isn't it? If things aren't, we've read out in the Nagarjuna, if things aren't empty, they can't exist. So, therefore we know that actually, what makes Buddhas possible? What is the true Buddha seed? What is the true Buddha nature? Nothing but emptiness. At which point we start seeing Buddha nature not as something true and different and separate beyond, but simply the nature of things being empty. Of course, all beings possess Buddha nature. Of course, all beings, in a sense, even are Buddha nature because they're empty. That gives them the possibility of change. It gives them the possibility of becoming a Buddha. This is the same in all of us. This is the same in all beings. Only if we now see Buddha nature as an image, as, if you like, a metaphor, this is where it starts getting quite complicated, but in a way, no worries if we can't follow the argument. As always, I'm just sketching. The conclusions are quite interesting. Where we're going is quite interesting. if we know that everything is empty, which obviously includes time, any philosophy, any theory that we're building on the basis of emptiness includes not simply a segmented linear time, but we can say mutual interpenetration of past, present and future. This is something which is developed in various ways over various times. But what that in a sense also does is make us stand back from this idea, well, now I'm a dumb, enlightened being, and maybe in the future, my Buddha nature will express itself. Well, no, in another sense, there's no fundamental difference between the sentient being mired in delusion that I am now and the perfect Buddha that I potentially am. This is interesting. And then we remember that Nagarjuna is absolutely insistent there is no difference between samsara and nirvana. If there is no difference between samsara as inhabited by suffering sentient beings and the nirvana that Buddhas see and experience and live in, then there is no difference between a suffering sentient being and a Buddha. Therefore, all beings, right here, right now, are fundamentally Buddhas, are fundamentally Buddha nature, just as they are. I'll read the Dogen again. Maybe it starts to make a different kind of sense now. Therefore, the very impermanency of grass and tree, thicket and forest is the Buddha nature. Why? Well, they're empty because they're impermanent. They're impermanent because they're empty. The very impermanency of men and things, body and mind, is the Buddha nature. Nature and lands, mountains and rivers are impermanent because they are the Buddha nature. Supreme and complete enlightenment because it is impermanent. What? Supreme and complete enlightenment, insofar as it's a thing, is by nature impermanent. Because it is impermanent, and hence real, because it is not impermanent, it can't be real, is the Buddha nature. And Dogen's very insistent on this is because if we think of it as something separate, then I can have Buddha nature or not have Buddha nature. Dogen's really insistent. No, I am, you are. This carpet, this computer is Buddha nature. Then we go, but surely my computer can't become enlightened. Well, then we're going in a different direction, aren't we? Grasses and trees, yeah. Computers and microphones, just as they are the Buddha nature, because they're impermanent, because they're empty. When we're talking about grasses and trees, we can understand because of the kind of wonderful Japanese appreciation of nature and the rest of it. But actually it applies just as much to computers and microphones and everything else. Dust, COVID virus, everything. It could not be otherwise. And so this is, it's quite serious Nagarjuna, quite serious Madhyamika, the middle way we've been talking about. So is this everybody agreeing? Well, not really. Is this just Dogen? Again, absolutely not. What is really, really interesting is that for these few centuries just before Dogen, we do have this idea of original enlightenment of all things, which does develop in Japan. And this is where the kind of this way of thinking is seen through to its conclusion. And it's not just in Zen. It's not just in Dogen. It actually comes out of the more mainstream monastic ways of thinking. And it also includes the new Pure Land schools. So Nichiren, Shinran, quite specifically beginning to talk in the same terms. The Pure Land is not elsewhere. This is the Pure Land. And in the mixed Vietnamese Pure Land Zen tradition that Thich Nhat Hanh comes out of, one of the little gutters which we used to chant walking around is, this is the Pure Land. This is the Pure Land. Not a metaphor. This is the Pure Land. So it's quite a radical teaching, but it comes out of, interestingly enough, a dualism which then gets metaphorized, stood on its head, seen in the context of the philosophy around emptiness, mixes up with the Japanese love of nature, and hey presto, you get this very deep, very profound expression of Buddha nature. Here, now, as part of this. Not there, not there, not there, but here, always here, and always now. And what's here and now? My experience of suffering, my experience of resistance, my experience of love, my experience of joy, my experience of the world around me. This is the material of our practice. And in actual fact, if this isn't the case, then of course, no ordinary mind. Ordinary mind is garbage. Ordinary mind is just illusion, trash. Unless, this is it, unless it's about here and about now. About staying with this and seeing what it shows us, seeing where it takes us. Because it is both nirvana and samsara. It is both enlightenment and delusion, and could not be otherwise. So is this suddenly the true truth as opposed to all others? I think it's interesting that it shows up in Zen at this point, and also very interesting that it shows up as Pure Land at this point. But actually there is no reason why this couldn't happen in terms of some of the discussions we've been having, a God-centered tradition. And if you think about Martin Luther King's idea of the beloved community and building the kingdom here. I was listening to a lecture by the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, the other day. And he was talking about absolute passion that the kingdom of God, is being built here, now, or it is being built nowhere. It's not about over there and over then. So even within that kind of tradition, we can still talk about the importance of this. But I think if we say and live with the paradox of this is the Pure Land, and I suffer, and you suffer, and we look around us, that we live in that tension, we live in that paradox, and out of that is our practice. Why would we practice? And this is the great question which sends Dogen to China. If all is the Buddha nature, just as it is, then can't we just sit back and, whatever? Well, no, because what bodhisattvas what Buddhas do is practice. Can't we just forget the precepts? I mean, if it's all Buddha nature anyway, can I just... Well, no, because the precepts as we live them, as we try and live them, are a description of realization. They're not rules, they're not even a prescription, they're a description of enlightened action in the world. And we have this wonderful world which we use sometimes in the general sense of enlightenment. It doesn't sound as serious, so we can use it more freely and we kind of panic a bit less. Realization. It's wonderful double meaning in English. To realize it is suddenly, to see, to understand. Oh, now I get it. I didn't realize. But it's also to make real. To realize is to make yourself real as Buddha, Bodhisattva, Buddha nature. It's to realize your Buddha nature. And that's our business. Whether we call it realizing the Pure Land, whether we call it building the kingdom, or do we just sit with our bums on our cushions? It's what we do.